Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. And welcome to another meeting of the Rushcliffe Borough Council Planning Committee. I'm Councillor Roger Upson and Chairman of this committee. To my left, your right, is Councillor Maureen Stockwood, my Vice Chairman. And I think we've got today Councillors Bailey, Clark, Gowland, Gray, Healy, Thomas, Price and Butler. I've missed anybody out that's present? No. And I think there are the substitutions there, are there not, for Councillor Mason, who's I think on holiday, and Councillor Purdue-Horan, who is indisposed of an illness. So did I miss out Price? Vicky Price, I did. The newcomer. My apologies. Welcome. And on the officers, I think we've got present Leanne Ashmore, Director of Development and Economic Development, Andrew Ashcroft, the Interim Service Manager for Planning, Helen Tambini, Democratic Services Manager, Tracy Coote, Laura Webb from Democratic Services, and another newcomer. Where is she? Hiding down there now. We've got Gemma Dennis, the new Principal Solicitor, who's taken over from Rebecca Sells, who's left the authority, I gather. So welcome. And planning officers Paul Taylor and Greg Sharman to my right will be taking the two reports we had this afternoon. Some basic usual housekeeping, if I may. No fire alarms planned that I know of. If it does go, then follow us as the best guidance, I think, to the assembly point out in the front car park there, or there is one to the back, but basically follow us. It's the mobile phones, my usual comment about mobile phones. If you could silence them or mute them, it's an easy thing to forget, isn't it? That would be appreciated. So, item 1 on the agenda is apologies for absence and substitute members. I think I've covered that, frankly, which takes us to the second item. Are there any declarations under the Code of Conduct or the Planning Code that any member wants to make? No. Lovely. Item 3 is the minutes of the previous meeting we had on the 9th of December. Seems a long time ago, but there we are. Our members of the committee, those that were here, agree that the minutes are correct, and if so, can I have a proposer and a seconder, please? Proposer, Councillor Bailey, seconded, Councillor Butler. Thank you very much. Takes us to item 4 on the agenda, which is to discuss this afternoon's 2 planning applications. My usual comment is, hopefully you've read them in some detail. Try not to repeat the same points and try and keep it concise and relevant. And as I say always, it is a quasi-judicial meeting, and we conduct it with the appropriate professionalism and behaviour. Only material planning issues should be debated this afternoon. We now note the report of the Director of Growth and Economic Development, which gives us the usual overview of the planning process this afternoon and the 2 applications that we're going to consider, which takes me, without more ado, to the first application, application number 21//02822/full, the Air Hostess, Stansted Avenue, Tolton, Nottinghamshire. Single-storey rear extension in the Tolton ward. So if I could hand over to Planning Officer Paul Taylor on my right to run through any late representations, if there are any. I think there is one, Paul, and then take us through your presentation. I'd be grateful. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just grab through the technology for 2 seconds so that anyone looking online can see what members of the room can see. You are quite correct, Chairman. There has been 1 late representation set out in the papers. It is a letter from a neighbouring occupier clarifying that they do not object to the proposal. Just a point of clarification, that has an impact on paragraph 13 within the agenda papers, as now we've had 9 letters that have been sent to neighbours, and none of them are still objecting to the proposal for members for consideration this afternoon. Take members to an aerial plan of the site. Apologies, we are reliant on ordnance, so the plan is slightly out of date insofar as the car parking and the tank courts shown at the southern end of the site. There's been a fairly recent modernisation to the public house that has reconfigured the outside space, which will become evident in the photographs I'll take members through shortly. But doesn't impact on the proposal, which, as the chairman has quite rightly pointed out, is a single-storey extension to the rear. It's in the location where my cursor is hopefully visible on the screen, not visible on the screen, but it's on the southern elevation, and it forms an extension to the existing commercial kitchens for the property. I might take members to an aerial photograph of the site again. Just caveat that the car park and the tank courts in the south and southeast corner of that image have been revised since this aerial photograph was taken. What I propose to do is take members on a short walk around the perimeter of the site, starting in the top right-hand corner of the image you see on Burnside Grove, bring you along to the T-junction, down Stansted Avenue, into the car park area, and show you the area of the proposed extension in question. Members will note it is a mixed-use area with the public house outlined in the red line on the map before you. Just to the north of that, there is a small parade of shops. On the opposite side of the road, Stansted Road on the western side, is a Methodist church, with the remainder of the area being predominantly residential. So this is the view looking west along Burnside Grove. Members will note the public house on the left-hand side of the image. Moving forward to the T-junction, again noting the public house on the left, the Methodist church on the right, and the shops are behind us. Moving down Stansted Avenue, pub on your left. You can see where the entrance to the car park used to be from the Belmouth District on the left-hand side of that image, but the picket fence preventing access there now as a result of an extended outside garden space. And on the left-hand side of the image, members' attention is also drawn to a raised deck area as part of the improvements that were approved in 2019. Again, just to look across the frontage of the site, the pub has two entrances, one onto Burnside Road, one onto Stansted Avenue. The recited tank court and expanded outside recreational area for the public house. The entrance to the car park visible on the right-hand side of that image, and the neighbouring bungalow that sits alongside the car park area. This is the area in which the extension is proposed to be, members. You'll notice the steps leading up to the outside decked area on the left-hand side of that image. To the immediate right of that raised deck, there is currently a void. The wall you see within that void is currently the commercial kitchens. And to the right-hand side with the white railings is the outside amenity space for the publican. So it's private amenity space for those working, operating within the pub itself. The proposal is actually just to extend that pub kitchen out level with those two areas of external railing you can see within that image. It would still retain that sort of storage area for barrels and other bits and bobs in association with the business beneath it. Again, a slightly closer image of the area in question. So because of the topography of the site, although it's a single-storey extension, it is at first floor from this particular vantage point. Again, an image sort of stepping up the steps you can see leads up to the outside dining decked area from the pub garden. Looking across to the boundary with the adjoining neighbouring properties, and again on the left-hand side you can see the line where the proposed extension would come out to level with the two areas of railing. And this is from that outside decked area, so it's the area behind that trellis. The extension will be the same width and height as that existing flat roofed area that serves the commercial kitchen with the satellite dish on it. It will just be projecting out to the right-hand edge of that trellis area. That's perhaps clearer explained within the plan. So the pink square on the image is the proposed extension. This is the existing layout, and on the left-hand side of that image, you will notice on the next slide, that's where the proposed kitchen is to be. Similarly, elevations show that there are minimal changes visible from the public domain. But again, just clicking through it, it shows an extension of that kitchen wall coming out with a window at the end of it to allow for a larger internal area for the preparation of food for patrons of the pub. There's no increase to the amount of covers proposed. There's no increase to the dining area. There's no alterations to the parking area. It's purely to allow those working within that kitchen environment a larger area to prepare the meals and be able to get them out to the residents and those visiting the area wishing to dine at the pub. You'll note that there have been no objections to the proposal. Councillor Mason has declared an interest. Like a lot of the community, she bought shares in the pub when it was in decline a number of years ago, and as a result has rightly declared an interest, hence before members this afternoon. Parish Council do not object. Colleagues in Environmental Health don't object, subject to a condition which is set out within the recommendation before you, and none of the neighbouring residents have objected to the proposal. As a result, the application is before members this afternoon with a recommendation to grant permission subject to the conditions set out in the papers. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. We have no speakers. As just been said, we have no objections formally, so the debate is open. I gather Councillor Healy has indicated wants to speak first, and then I'll take anybody else. Councillor Clark. Councillor Healy.
Thank you, Chair. Just to highlight perhaps a little bit about the Aerostate itself. It is community pub and owned by the local community. Previous pub company, Everard's, I believe, sold it to the local community. They couldn't make success of it. And as a result of that, community putting funds together, Parish Council took a leading role and they set up a company called the Frankfurt Committee. This, as we've just been made aware, enabled business to buy shares. The result was overwhelming, in fact, and the turnaround has been a huge success. And at the centre really is local landlady Rachel Hughes. She runs the pub with her ex-husband and business partner, Mark Hughes. But as again, Paul has highlighted, the criteria here, and Mark and Rachel were both concerned about the limited space in the kitchen, very, very busy. Average Sunday, 150 covers, busy lunchtime, busy through the week as well. And staff working very hard, as I say, in a limited space. And they're a very caring management team, do a lot about their staff and their people. So the conditions are far from adequate, hence this planning application to increase the size substantially and make life easier for the staff. Just as a matter of interest, through the pandemic, all of the problems this caused to hospitality, etc. Again, responding to the community, they arranged a takeaway service, cooking hot meals for the local community. The other thing that's typical with the management team here and the success of the Equistess is they picked up numerous awards from their hospitality via their previous pub. And certainly since they've taken over the management of this one, just before Christmas, they were crowned the Food and Drink Establishment of the Year here in Rushcliffe, the annual awards ceremony.
Councillor Healy, I appreciate your marketing on behalf of the pub, and I feel that you've been there regularly, but is this relevant to the planning application?
Well, I'm sorry, I was just highlighting. Yeah, I have used I've had the odd pint or two, but all I'm trying to highlight here is that the management team are concerned about the care and concern of the staff. They want this extra space, it's there to be had. And yeah,
okay.
I'm happy to stop the
Points
application.
well made. Thank you.
Thank you,
Councillor Clark.
Thank you, Chairman. I think this is pretty straightforward, really. If it hadn't been a declaration of interest, I would venture to suggest that it would have probably gone through on delegated powers without any contention. We've heard there aren't any objections, so I'll move the recommendation.
Thank you, Councillor Clark. Anybody want to second Councillor Clark? Oh, a wealth of hands have gone up there. I think we'll take Councillor Gowan as a seconder. Takes us to the vote. If we could, can Gemma Dennis over there ready to take the count then? All those in favour of the recommendation to approve, raise your hands. I think it was unanimous, was it? Unanimous. Thank you very much. Right, takes us to the second and final item of the afternoon. I can turn over. Which is Application number 21//02569/4 to Cherry Street, Bingham. Proposed two-storey side and rear extensions, single-storey rear extension, loft conversion, part demolition of front boundary wall for new wider driveway and drop curb. And we have some late submissions there, haven't we? Let me just get my notes together. Yes, I think if we could take the late submissions, please, and then we'll hear our speaker. I've got two, I think.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Yeah, so I'll just draw members' attention to the two late representations on this item. First of which is a consultation response from the local highways authority. They have confirmed they do not object, but have recommended two conditions and an informative to cover the application. So those conditions and informatives have been recommended by the officers to follow through to the recommendation within the report. The second representation comes from a revised plan. The revised plan is simply to update the design of two windows in the north elevation in response to the recommended condition 4. So just illustrating that the windows are obviously glazed and top front opening only. So it just clarifies those 2 points within the revised plan. So again, as a recommendation, that condition 4 be updated to include the revised elevation plan.
Thank you, Greg. We want to do the presentation.
Right, yeah, so as Chairman introduced, 2 Cherry Street in Bingham. And the application is for a range of household works, including 2-storey side and rear extensions, single-storey rear extension, a loft conversion and associated works, and the part demolition of the front boundary wall to allow for widening of the existing drive and dropped curb. So just walking members through the site location here. So the site is in a predominantly residential area. It's the western site of Cherry Street. You've got former Chesterfield Arms Public House to the west of the site, although that's currently being redeveloped, and there is permission for a block of apartments to the rear of the site around about here. You've also got the private access for the town council building up here, which runs directly to the north of the site, providing some separation to the gardens of residential properties further north. So just moving through some photographs of the site itself. The property is a 2-storey semi-detached property, brick and render finishes and rosemary tiles to the roof. Okay, in this image here, you can see application sites just beyond the existing shrubbery. You've got the driveway here for the town council offices, and then you've got a private drive, I believe number 10 and then 12 Church Street that you can see in front of you there. And taking a step further back along Cherry Street here, where you can actually see number 14 from the rear range, number 14 Church Street, that is, and the application site in the distance. This is a view down the driveway for the town council offices. This is adjacent to the northern boundary of the application site. This is stood on that driveway looking towards the rear gardens of number 8 and number 10 Church Street. And this is looking back down that private driveway to Cherry Street frontage. You can see on the right hand side of the application there, part of the attached garage of the application site inside elevation of the property. So if we now go into the application site itself, it's existing driveway and the attached garage. And looking from the application site now towards the northwest, where you can see the town council buildings. And then further north towards the residential neighbours along Church Street. Now stood within the rear garden of the application site, you can see the existing attached garage structure. There was previously a workshop on the back of this, which has already been removed, and the single-storey rear range. These are proposed to be demolished as part of the proposal. And again, this is just looking further north towards the residential neighbours from Church Street. A closer view of the rear elevations to where the single-storey rear extension is proposed, and you can see the adjoining neighbour. You can see here that the adjoining neighbour has actually got a conservatory to the rear elevation, and you can see the hedgerow runs along the shared boundary. Part of this hedgerow will require to be removed to facilitate the single-storey rear extension, but only so much is required for the extension itself. This is an example of a similar extension that was previously approved at number 8 Cherry Street, further down the road, which is a 2-storey side extension and the driveway widening as well. Just running through the existing plans, to the attached garage range to the rear, first floor plans, and the elevations, running into the proposed plans. So this is the single-storey element of the rear extensions, 3 metres deep along the shared boundary with the neighbour. It then steps out into the 2-storey range to the rear, which is 5 metres in depth from the rear of the property, and then wraps around the side of the property to the frontage where it will be 1 metre setback from the front of the existing dwelling. First floor plan just shows getting 2 additional bedrooms. There's also 2 side windows which are subject to the late representation on the plans, but the obviously glazed on top and open only. And then the plan showing the loft conversion and roof alterations with the bedroom and roof space. The site plan here, although you can't see it particularly well on the large screen, does show the extent of the works. And just shows again there is going to be a gap to the northern boundary of approximately 0.7 metres set off the northern boundary there, as well as the proposed driveway on the frontage. In terms of the elevations, you can see here the widening the driveway into the property, widened by 2.39 metres with the removal of that section of boundary wall, and the design of the front of the extension, which was revised during the application process, set down from the main ridge of the dwelling with level eaves and set back from the frontage as shown on the floor plans. Full set of elevations here, just again go to show the obscure windows in the northern elevation here, facing neighbours on Church Street. The hitch roof follows to the side and then to the rear also, where you can see the proposed door window to serve loft conversion, and you can also see the monopitch roof on the proposed single-storey extension, which is 3 metres deep. You can see here the side of the single-storey extension will have a mixed render and brickwork finish. In terms of the application itself, it's probably important to highlight that relevant demolition consent, the demolition of a section of boundary wall in the conservation area, has already been granted for the removal of the section of the front boundary wall. In terms of the application process itself, concerns were raised by residents, the ward member and the town council relating to the impact on the amenity of neighbours, particularly those along Church Street, from overbearing, overlooking and overshadowing issues. The main considerations in relation to this application will be design, amenity, highways and heritage matters. As discussed in the late reps, highways do not object to the scheme subject to the conditions as recommended. In terms of heritage matters, the case officer is accredited by the Institute of Historic Building Conservation. So they've assessed heritage matters within the report before you and found that he would preserve the special characteristics of the building and conservation area, which is a desirable criteria in section 72 of the Planning Listed Buildings and Conservation Areas Act. From a design perspective, the scheme has been revised through the process and has been set down from the main roof ridge, set back from the scheme frontage, and uses a hitch roof to remain sympathetic to the existing house. In terms of over intensity, the scheme is a large extension, however it does retain driveways to the front, access down the side and a good sized rear garden. And as such, officers do not consider it over intensive to the site and consider the design would be sympathetic and subservient to the host property and wider area. In terms of amenity considerations, separation to the front and rear would be adequate to prevent any impacts front and rear. Or Cherry Street has an existing conservatory, and therefore there are not considered to be any undue impacts from the single story extension. And in terms of the neighbours to the north of the site, the closest parts of number 10 Church Street will have a separation distance of circa 14 metres from the side elevation of the proposed extension. So whilst this scheme would be considered to cause some limited overshadowing of the neighbours' gardens, it is not considered that the amount of overshadowing would be requisite to or significant, and therefore would not be merit to refuse the application. As such, it is before you tonight or today with a recommendation for approval, subject to the conditions as set out in the report, as amended by those in the late representations.
Thank you, Mr. Sharman. We have one speaker, Jennifer Broderick, who is, I understand, objecting. Are you staying at the table there? I think that's.
Shall I say it? That's.
I think we're happy with it, aren't we? We've got the microphone. Right, yes, no need to move. You'll have up to 5 minutes, and when the clock starts, when your microphone comes on, and then in the last 30 seconds, you'll just begin a warning, 30 seconds left. So in your own time, when it comes to all, press the button.
Okay. Right, thank you for your time today. So my name's Jen, and I live with my partner and my children at 10 Church Street. I'm also speaking on behalf of my neighbour Jane Berry at number 8. And I'm here because our gardens actually overlook this proposed extension. We both share the view, which we outlined in our joint letter of objection, which we submitted 29th September, that we oppose this development basically due to the overdevelopment of the site, the sheer scale of it being overbearing and overshadowing. I have taken the time to reconsider the revised proposals. There are some improvements to the overall design with the revision pitch of the roof, but it doesn't address the sheer scale of the development and the overall impact. So we do continue to oppose the application. I've got no objection to an extension and improving the residential property, providing it's in keeping with the character and appearance of the main house, but I don't believe the proposal does that. I do believe it is an overdevelopment of the site. The proposed extension is very large in scale. The existing 3-bed semi, it's going to be extended to both the side and the rear to become a huge 5-bed house. It's undoubtedly going to have a very overbearing impact on our views and our gardens. You know, our views are going to change. The sunlight cast over our gardens is going to change, and you can't see it from those pictures because the pictures you've seen today are not from our gardens looking across. And when a person stands in our gardens, you can just see how overbearing it will be. Because this application is going to have a significantly large mass and bulk to both the side and the rear. And then the councillor for Bingham, Gareth Williams, he took the time to stand in our garden to observe the impact from our view. And please do refer to his submitted comments in support of rejecting the proposals. And you know, I would welcome anybody to come to our gardens to see from our viewpoint. Also, if you were to stand from our upstairs windows and look across the row house on Cherry Street, you would see there are no other houses with an elevation to the rear over 1 story. I know number 8 Cherry Street was granted planning permission and they have an extension, but it doesn't feature a large and overbearing elevation to the rear. In fact, the original proposals were rejected so that it would be less imposing. So if you did grant permission today, it will be setting a new precedent, and I don't believe it's in keeping with the other houses in the row on this street. So as I pointed out in our original letter we submitted, I'd just like to draw your attention to the following points. So the height and bulk to the rear means the extension will be, I believe, significantly disproportionate to the size of the original 3-bed dwelling. The proposed extension not only will be significantly increasing the height from a single story to a 2-story rear building, but also the width. A sense of being hemmed in with the result of both mine and my neighbour at number 8. So our outdoor amenity space will be affected by loss of sunlight to our rear gardens. So it is going to have a detrimental impact on our amenities. Our gardens are going to be overshadowed. Our enjoyment of our gardens and our views are going to be affected. The view of the extension from our main windows would be seen as a huge massive side wall height. You know, it's going to be very, very high from what it is currently. I don't believe it's a very modest or appropriate extension to an existing property. So furthermore, the national policy framework outlines the development of poor design, which I do believe it is, should be refused if it fails to take the opportunity to improve the character and quality of the area, which in this case it is significant because of the conservation status of the area. So I don't believe the applicants have fully considered the impacts this will have on those existing neighbours. Before making your decision today, I would ask you just to take note of the planning committee at Bingham Town Council, who are familiar with both the street and the area. They considered this application at its meeting on 19th of October, and they did object to the plans. Okay. The committee supported the concerns of the residents of Church Street of being overbearing, overshadowing, and having no developing impact. So yeah, finally, I'd just like to seek to everybody to consider rejecting planning applications on the grounds I've outlined. Thank you, everybody.
Thank you very much. Nicely done within the time and good points made. Microphone on, please. Thank you. That's right. Mr. Sean, there's some points there I picked up on, and I'm sure you've just noted about sunlight and views and height and mass and the like. I think we could probably comment about the views, couldn't we, at least? I don't think that's a material consideration, but there are other issues. So if you could just pick up on those and then the others you picked on, thanks.
Yes, thank you, Chair. Yes, so in terms of the material considerations, we'll be looking at whether the scheme would overshadow the neighbourhood and cause any significant loss of sunlight, whether it be overbearing, which is not a view, it's not necessarily a loss of view, but an overbearing impact. The actual loss of the view itself wouldn't be a material planning consideration, and whether it would cause any significant overlooking issues. And it's pertinent to point out that policy requires there to be significant amenity impact. It's accepted there will be some impacts from development, but in order to comply with policy, it must not be significant in terms of the impacts that I had. The points I picked out were largely to do with the scale of the development, overdevelopment, overshadowing and overbearing, and also out of keeping with other houses. In terms of out of keeping with other houses, in terms of the two-storey rear aspect, whilst it's acknowledged that other properties haven't extended 2 stories to the rear, that doesn't necessarily mean that they can't. It's simply a question of every application is reviewed on its own merits. So the fact that nobody else has doesn't necessarily mean that they cannot. So every application is assessed. In terms of the scale and the overdevelopment, overbearing, shadowing issues, as discussed in the officer's report, whilst there would be a degree of overshadowing given the orientation of the extension due south of the neighbours to the north, given the separation distances, as well as the private access that runs between the site and the direct neighbours to the north gardens, it's not considered that there would be any significant overshadowing or overbearing impacts due to separation and boundary treatments in between. The plot is a good sized plot and could take the development without appearing overdevelopment or over-intensive for the site. There is plentiful garden remaining as well as side access and driveways.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you. Right, who wants to start the debate? Councillor Clark, thank you.
Trying to hand back again.
I know, isn't it? We've missed you while you've been on the hip replacement, and I have to say it's good to have you back.
Just a couple of questions first of all, just digest the answers before sort of committing myself one way or another. It's interesting to hear the objectors' comments. First of all, I'm interested to know, yes, it is a large extension. I think we can all agree it's a significant extension. So how does that impact on, in terms of especially the conservation officer, who apparently is the case officer as well, how does that impact on the effect on the adjoining house? Because historically it was built as a pair of matching or mirror semi-detached houses. it will no longer be anything like that. It will be a small 3-bedroom semi-detached house with a very large house attached to it. So I'd just be interested to know what the planning officer's observations are on that. In terms of the north elevation, although it's got a small obscured window in it, apart from that small obscured window, is it a massive single surface material, or is there any interest in the elevation at all that would help break it up? Because I have to confess that it does look a rather large mass of single material at the moment, whether it's rendering or or whatever it is. And there is the access track path, whatever you want to call it, to the rear of the council offices, which does provide some barrier or break from the rear of the Church Street properties. But I suppose it's a matter of opinion, isn't it, as to how much impact the additional height on this extension will have on those gardens. But I do have some concern about the size of the extension in relation to the adjoining property, and I'd like some clarification on the north elevation.
I'm sure we're pointing in the right direction on that plan.
Yeah, thank you, Jack. So in terms of your second question there, the north elevation is the top right-hand drawing on the screen in front of you. So the front half of the north elevation would be rendered with a brick banding at the level course, so that's to match the material finish on the existing property. Then the rear section, where it extends beyond the line of the existing house, would then have a full brick finish to full height. So you'd have part render and part brickwork, as well as the windows in there. So that's the material finishes as proposed.
Could I just interject there? Is that so the brickwork on the rear part of the extension, is that just all continuous, or is there any banding or relief or interest in that brickwork at all?
There's not proposed to be any particular detailing to the brick. It hasn't identified on the plans before you that there is to be any particular brick detailing. So as before you, it would be plain brickwork on that elevation. In terms of the conservation matters, the properties themselves, there's a group of 4 properties, 2 pairs of semi-detached houses on the northwestern side of Cherry Street. They are not, if within the conservation area townscape appraisal, they're not identified as any particularly positive buildings that input into the character and appearance of the area. So they aren't identified in that respect. The conservation officer, who was also the case officer in this case, has clarified that they don't feel the proposed extension would imbalance the property. The extension has been set down and set back, so it wouldn't be over dominant or dominate the original property. So it could be read as to what is the original, what's the further extension. And similar works, although it doesn't extend to the rear, similar works in terms of the 2-story side extension previously been approved and implemented on number 8 Cherry Street, which was one you showed during the presentation originally. So there aren't considered to be any undue heritage concerns in terms of unbalancing of the pair of semi-detached properties.
I suppose just as another further supplementary, Chairman, forgive me if I've missed it being reported, but has any actual work been on projection of the shadow onto the rear gardens in terms of angle of sunlight and angle of shadow now and projected?
No, so they haven't done any sunlight assessment, so to speak. So there hasn't been any shadowing assessment to directly demonstrate what the impacts are. It isn't a requirement, a validation requirement to provide such details to allow the assessment. Your officers have carefully considered what impact there will be, and as previously discussed, consider it to be a significant impact, and the impact would be to the far ends of the gardens on those properties, which, as clarified by previous planning inspectors, are afforded more limited weight and more formal spaces towards the houses of residential properties.
Anyone else? Councillor Butler.
Just a query really, one of your photographs showed a neighbouring or a nearby property that had been extended in a similar but reflective way, if that makes sense, within the way. So is that the property that's referred to in paragraph 33, number 8 Cherry Street?
Yeah.
Right, so that is in effect 2 or 3 doors down from the proposed site. And that looks as if it's at the end of it looks to the left of it, looks like there's an access road to somewhere or driveway somewhere. Whereas on the applicant site, we've got a mirror image, in fact, haven't we? So we've got the extension to the right on the access to the parish council offices on the right as well. So compared to the number that photograph I've just seen, number 8, not a very simple question, but sometimes simple questions are hard to answer. How does the visual size of this proposed extension compare to the one that's on number 8? Is it significantly different? Because it looks like the houses were probably built at a similar time.
Yes, so the houses are all the same original design. The extensions to number 8, I believe, I haven't got the plans in front of me, but I believe they are slightly wider, but obviously don't include the 2-storey aspect to the rear. So that's solely to the side that they have been approved and built on number 8, rather than also going to the rear. I believe in red and white, possibly that's number 2 that we are looking at today.
So it seems to me that the main difference between those two then is the vision to the rear aspect as opposed to the space on the road. So, yeah, okay, that's helpful. Thank you. So that's all thinking.
Councillor Gowan.
Thank you. Can I ask why the building, the rendering? I mean, I understand that you don't really like to see big blank walls, but what appears on the plans is that a hodgepodge of bits of render and bits of brick, which also would not be particularly attractive. Do you know why that originates? Is it just that when the new building is being built, something rendered?
I'm not sure exactly what the reasoning is for it. I would suggest that obviously providing the render banding to the front is to ensure that it follows the existing property in terms of its design and appearance. So that has been wrapped around the side of the property as well, so that it's clear and follows around. The aspect to the rear is then fully in brick. I'm not 100% sure why they've chosen to do it in that particular formal manner. I wouldn't like to hazard a guess because it may not be correct. But yeah, they have chosen to stop that at the rear, probably that rear of where the original property is.
Thank you.
Councillor Price.
Could I just pick up on the point about the shadowing assessment? Because obviously the objective is raised concern that there would be overshadowing, and the report says that you don't consider that the overshadowing would be significant, but there's no data to support either of those positions. Could a shadowing assessment have been done and could one be done?
Yes, so there is obviously the potential that there is a way of assessing sunlight, and architects can go through processes to provide shadowing reports and to make a formal assessment of that. In this instance, officers do not believe that is required in the support scheme. Officers are satisfied following their own assessment that there will not be any significant impact.
Thank you. I've got Councillor Stockwood on my left, and then I've got Councillor Thomas.
Thank you, Chairman.
Oh, Councillor Bailey. All right.
So,
Yes, I can speak. My own house is in the same builder, same render, same brickwork and what. And I knew the architect. Well, actually, I didn't. I knew his daughter. It's 1939. So that's enough history. Actually, my house is the same orientation as well. So it gets quite a bit of sun in the morning from the east.
Yeah.
And there will be a slight cut-off in the afternoon from the south, but there will be some from the south, and there will be full amount from the west. That's, that's how it happens in my own property. And I think that's why the officer is probably saying that there is, a good amount of sun that will reach there. That's the only point I wanted to make.
No, good points made there, as you say, there's some travelling around from the east, south, and then setting in the west. And on the site plan, you can envisage that, and as you say, the sun will be highest in the sun in the south. But, Councillor Thomas, thank you, Alex.
Thank you, Chair. 3 questions really. One was it related to Councillor Clark's question about the fact that it's unbalanced, it's unbalancing the semi-detached there, and the answer was given in terms of the heritage aspect. Is there any other requirement in policy in terms of scale and massing for it to be similar to the adjacent property? That was the first question. The second question is, what length is of rear garden will this property have once the extension's in place? And the third question is, how many parking spaces are there?
Thank you. Well, Mr. Sharman considers those points. I would hope your first point is not the case on semi-detached properties. So often I've designed them where one of the semis has a totally different rear extension, side extensions to the other. I mean, that is the nature of many developments that I look at almost every week. So I'm interested to see what he says on that. I don't think there's ever a view that an original semi-detached should stay balanced for both of them forever. It's a choice. However, I'll refer to you.
Thank you, Chair. Yes, so in terms of the purely design aspects of the balancing of the two semi-detached properties, the policy requirement is that developments are sympathetic to the characteristics of the host property and the wider area. So as previously discussed, because the extension has been set down from the main roof bridge, set back from the front elevation of the property, it can clearly be read as an extension to the property and not competing with the original characteristics of the property. So for those reasons, it's been considered that it would remain sympathetic and subservient to the host property and therefore wouldn't cause any design concerns in that regard. But no, there isn't a policy that requires semi-detached dwellings to remain a balanced pair, so to speak. In terms of the rear garden length, just brought up the site plan. It's quite small, though, but it is 15.7 metres at the smallest part of the depth. So that's coming from the back of the 2-storey extension. So you've got a minimum of 15, and that will be up to 17, where the smaller single-storey extension is. And in terms of the number of parking spaces as well, you can see there are 2 parking spaces to the front of the property on the wider driveway.
Okay, happy with that. Councillor, Councillor Bailey, yes.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. My question leads on from Councillor Butler's question. It was useful to see the photograph of number 8, which was obviously extended to the left as you look from the road. My personal feeling is that we've seen so many semi-detached houses, particularly in the West Bridgeton area, that have been extended both at the back and to a wraparound. But really, this is becoming more commonplace than it might have been some years ago. To my mind, it seems quite a sensible way of making a property suitable for today's families' needs. Although things will have to move on, and they do, I personally feel that
with what we've seen today, that this is what's happening and being approved, and Westbridge would be a good example, and many other sites as well. And I just think this is making a semi-detached property suitable for the 21st century. Thank you.
Councillor Gale?
I'm afraid to say, I think a lot of residents of Westbridge would be very unhappy to. And that wouldn't be very happy, so I'm not sure that's necessarily a good argument. I think the argument about the light is the houses to the, if I'm correct with the north, it's houses to the north on Church Road. It's not this house, it's how this house impacts towards the north. And as I understand it, thank you. Thank you. And as I understand it, the garden is 20 metres long and the house is 9 metres tall. Thank you. I think that this time of year, it will be casting a shadow to all those households. It's quite tall, we're not that far away.
Yeah, we've got the site plan up now, as you say, and the plan faces north, without taking the ground over and stuff again, but in all plans are north. So the sun will rise on the right in the east and travel round to the bottom of the plan and set on the left-hand side on the west. So you're absolutely right, it depends in the summer and winter. And if the architect had done a proper scheme of showing the travelling of the sun in the various seasons of the year, you'd have more data. I think, as the officer said, did you not say about 14 metres from the proposed site? You've got the roadway, haven't you, and then the gardens, and then the houses on Church Street. I think the point you're making is, will the sun, when it's travelling at midday in the winter, probably worst case scenario, what effect will it have in casting a shadow on the gardens of the Church Street property? I don't know. I think we've been here before.
Yeah, 14 metres was the minimum distance. So that's the distance from the rear, the end of the rear range on 8 and 10 Church Street to the closest part of the extension. So it's obviously further to the patio areas and the end of the conservatory.
I was just saying, to the house.
Yeah.
It seems quite low to me, but like, it's going to be, it seems quite high to me.
Okay, make the point then, it's one for us all to consider, isn't it? Okay. Anybody else? Or we're all done. Councillor Clark.
Well, we need to move it along, don't we, Chairman? I think, yes, the objector has made some very fair and valid points, and I think everybody's always concerned when there is change afoot, because you're never quite sure exactly what the impact is. So, yes, I do sympathise with the objections that have been raised. Counter to that, I have to say that from what I've heard and seen this afternoon and in answer to questions, whilst there obviously will be some impact, as I think the officer indicated, I'm not convinced there will be a significant impact. I'm not going to claim there's no impact, because clearly there will be. But I can't see there will be a significant impact, and therefore I think they're very difficult to sustain or protect or justify significant objections to this. So on that basis, I will move the recommendation.
Recommendation moved by Councillor Clark. Anybody prepared to second? Councillor Butler, thank you.
Yeah, yes, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Like Councillor Clark, I've been weighing up the impact that it's likely to be, whether it's significant or not. I also found Councillor Bailey's comments about sort of house of the 21st century. So I think, thinking carefully on this, I think on balance, yes, I have to second the recommendation.
Right, so we have a proposal and a second, so I think we can take it to the vote, if members are prepared to. So all those in favour and supporting the recommendation to approve, please show your hands now. Okay. All those against? don't think there's any abstentions. I don't think there will be on mathematics. No. So carried, the recommendation is carried, thank you. And that concludes this afternoon's business. Thank you, everybody. I will formally close the meeting.